Pennsylvania's backroads don't just connect small towns. They pass through the ones that shouldn't exist anymore. Places where coal fires have burned underground for 6 decades, where entire communities were bulldozed so completely that you can stand on a street corner that isn't there, where the air itself became a killer, where experimental concrete utopias rotted in a decade, and where the ground rings like a bell for reasons science still can't fully explain. This isn't a ghost story. It's worse. These 17 towns are monuments to industrial catastrophe, failed experiments, and the kind of abandonment that leaves scars on the landscape itself. Some were poisoned by their own prosperity. Others were erased by decisions made in distant offices. A few were just cursed by geology. Yeah, or the simple fact that someone built them in the wrong place at the wrong time. The don't stop framing isn't melodrama, it's recognition. These places don't want visitors, they want witnesses. Drive through Centralia and you're crossing an active disaster zone that's been burning since Kennedy was president. Stop in Byrnesville and you're parking on top of a town that was so thoroughly deleted. It exists only as an empty field with a road running through it. Pennsylvania's hidden map isn't in your GPS. It's in the spaces between destinations, the exits you pass without noticing, the valleys where the air feels heavier, the roads where your headlights catch foundations that lead nowhere. These towns didn't fade quietly into history. They collapsed, burned, suffocated, and were systematically dismantled. And somehow, that makes them impossible to forget. Here are 17 creepiest small towns in Pennsylvania you should never stop while driving. Centralia. Centralia sits on top of hell, and hell has been patient. The coal seam fire ignited in 1962, probably from a landfill burn that found an exposed vein, though the exact cause is still disputed, and it's been eating the earth beneath the town ever since. The fire department tried to put it out. They failed. Engineers tried to contain it. They failed. The best estimates say there's enough coal down there to burn for another 250 years, maybe more. The town's response wasn't heroism or stubbornness, it was slow-motion evacuation. By the 1980s, sinkholes were opening without warning. Carbon monoxide was venting into basements, and a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski fell into a suddenly appearing crater that nearly swallowed him whole. The federal government condemned the town and bought out the residents. And the state claimed eminent domain on every property. The zip code was revoked in 2002. As of the 2020 census, 5 people remain. What makes Centralia genuinely unsettling isn't the fire itself. It's the fact that you can't see it. On cold days, steam rises from cracks in the pavement like the earth is exhaling poison. Sections of Route 61 buckled so badly they had to reroute the highway, leaving behind the famous graffiti highway, a fractured stretch of asphalt covered in spray paint that the landowner finally buried in 2020 because people wouldn't stop trespassing. Walk the empty streets and the ground is warm under your feet. Trees grow stunted or not at all in certain spots. The air smells faintly chemical. You're standing on an active disaster that's older than most of the people reading this, and it will outlive your grandchildren. Pithole City. Pithole City is the opposite problem, a town that burned too fast, not too long. In January 1865, it was wilderness. By September, it was a city of 15,000 people with over 50 hotels, a daily newspaper, a water system, and the world's first oil pipeline. The oil wells were so productive that fortunes were made in weeks. And then, just as quickly, the wells ran dry. Fire destroyed much of the town in 1866. By 1870, the population was barely 200. The borough charter was annulled in 1877. By the early 20th century, the land had reverted entirely to forest and farmland, as if the city had never existed. Today, Pithole is a state park and archaeological site. The only remnants are mowed grass rectangles where buildings once stood, a few informational plaques, and a small visitor center. Stand at the corner of First and Holmden Streets, a real intersection with real street signs marking the precise historical location. And you're surrounded by nothing. Empty field, trees in the distance. Silence. The markers tell you that you're standing in the middle of what was once the third busiest post office in Pennsylvania, but your eyes see only grass. It's the most complete vanishing act in the state. Pithole didn't crumble or decay. It was erased so thoroughly that the only proof it existed is the historical record and the unnatural flatness of certain fields. The creepiest part isn't what's there, it's what isn't. Donora. Donora built its identity on smoke. Two massive plants, U.S. Steel's Zinc Works and American Steel and Wire, operated 24 hours a day in a narrow river valley that trapped air like a bowl. For decades, the town wore its pollution like a badge of industrial pride. Then, in late October 1948, weather conditions created a temperature inversion that locked the emissions close to the ground. For 5 days, the town was swallowed by thick yellow smog that burned eyes, seared lungs, and turned noon into twilight. 20 people died outright. Over 7,000, more than half the population, were sickened. The mills kept running through the first 3 days of the crisis. The Donora smog became one of the pivotal environmental disasters in American history, a direct catalyst for the Clean Air Act. But the town itself never recovered its pre-disaster identity. The mills eventually closed. The population collapsed from over 14,000 at its peak to under 4,500 today. What lingers isn't just economic decline, it's the psychological scar of a community that discovered its lifeblood was also its executioner. The Donora Smog Museum stands as testament, but the real memorial is the town itself, quiet, diminished, and forever defined by the week the air became poison. Eckley Miners Village. Eckley Miners Village didn't decay, it was embalmed. This 19th century coal patch town was built and owned entirely by the mining company. The homes, the store, the church, the doctor's office. Workers were paid in scrip redeemable only at the company store. Every aspect of life was controlled from birth to burial. When the 1970 film The Molly Maguires needed an authentic location, they chose Eckley because it hadn't changed. After filming, the state bought it and turned it into a living history site. The buildings were stabilized, the streets were preserved. A small number of residents, many descended from original mining families, still live in the historic homes, renting from the state. The result is profoundly strange. Eckley is too perfect, too orderly, too quiet. So it feels like walking onto a movie set after the crew has left, except people actually live inside the exhibit. The company's ghost still hangs over everything. The identical row houses, the rigid street grid, the careful preservation of a system designed to extract maximum labor while maintaining maximum control. There's no life, only maintenance. No chaos, only historical accuracy. It's the uncanny valley of historic preservation. It looks like a real town, but the soul has been replaced with plaques and tour schedules. The creepiest company towns are the ones that died. Eckley is creepier because it was forbidden to. Pennhurst. Pennhurst wasn't a town, but it functioned like one. A self-contained campus of Gothic revival buildings housing thousands of Pennsylvania's most vulnerable citizens. Opened in 1908 as the Eastern State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, it was designed for 500 patients. By the 1960s, over 3,500 people were crammed inside. In 1968, NBC 10 Philadelphia reporter Bill Baldini walked through with a camera and broadcast what he found. Patients naked, filthy, tied to beds, left in their own waste, physically abused by staff. The 5-part expose Suffer the Little Children triggered federal lawsuits that dragged through courts for years. A 1977 ruling declared conditions unconstitutional. Pennhurst finally closed in 1987. The sprawling complex of massive stone buildings sat abandoned for decades, decaying into one of the most photographed ruins in the state. The architecture itself feels oppressive. High walls, barred windows, long corridors designed for institutional control, not human dignity. In a move that remains deeply controversial, parts of the site were converted into Pennhurst Asylum, a commercial haunted attraction that capitalizes on the documented horror with fake blood and jump scares. The real ghosts aren't the ones in costume. They're the thousands of people who suffered systemic neglect inside walls that now sell tickets to thrill seekers. The building's transformation from site of genuine atrocity to Halloween entertainment raises a question the management never answers. Who exactly are we supposed to be afraid of? Austin. Austin was killed by concrete negligence. The town thrived as a lumber and paper mill center in the early 1900s, nestled in a Potter County valley beneath the Bayless Pulp and Paper Company Dam. That dam was a problem from the start. Engineers warned the concrete structure had cracks and design flaws. The company ignored them. On September 30th, 1911, after heavy rain, the dam failed catastrophically. A 40-foot wall of water and debris obliterated the town in minutes. At least 78 people died, though the real number is likely higher. Entire families were erased. Bodies were found miles downstream, or never found at all. Austin rebuilt, but it rebuilt smaller, quieter, and haunted by what loomed above it. A second major flood in 1942 destroyed any momentum toward real recovery. Today, fewer than 500 people live there. But the main character of Austin's story isn't the town, it's the dam. The ruins still stand in the forest upstream, and they are massive. Fractured slabs of concrete the size of houses jut from the hillside like broken teeth. Rebar twists from the structure like exposed bone. Trees grow through the cracks. It looks less like an abandoned piece of infrastructure and more like the carcass of something that died violently. You can hike to it, stand inside the hollow spaces, and feel the weight of the hundreds of thousands of gallons it failed to hold. The town below lives in its shadow, literally and psychologically, a permanent reminder that the disaster wasn't an act of God. It was a choice. Hellam Township. The seven gates of hell aren't real, but the fear is. This legend centers on a stretch of wooded area off Trout Run Road in Hellam Township, a place with no documented asylum, no recorded fire, no historical tragedy to justify the mythology. The story claims 7 gates once stood here, and if you pass through all of them in the correct sequence, you'd walk straight into hell itself. Only 1 gate supposedly remains visible during the day. The rest reveal themselves only at night, and only to those cursed enough to find them. What actually exists are private driveways, old farm gates, and the power of decades of local storytelling to transform ordinary rural darkness into something genuinely menacing. The nearby town's name, Hellam, is pure coincidence, likely derived from Hallamshire, England, but it's the kind of coincidence that feeds legends like gasoline feeds fire. Teenagers have been driving these roads for generations, headlights cutting through the trees, looking for proof of something that was never there. The creepiness isn't supernatural, it's psychological. When enough people believe a place is cursed, when enough stories pile up over enough years, the place starts to feel wrong, even in daylight. The legend mapped itself onto the landscape so thoroughly that the physical location now carries the weight of the fiction. You're not afraid of what's there. You're afraid because you've been told to be. Concrete City. Concrete City was supposed to be the future. Fireproof, modern, efficient housing for the managers of a Nanticoke coal colliery. Between 1911 and 1913, the company built 20 identical 2-family homes from poured concrete in a perfect grid. It was an ambitious experiment in industrial-age utopianism, a vision of indestructible community built with cutting-edge materials. The experiment failed within a decade. The concrete homes were structural nightmares, perpetually damp, impossible to heat, plagued by drainage problems, and utterly resistant to any modification or repair. Workers hated them. By 1924, barely 10 years after completion, the company abandoned the project entirely. The ruins are now municipally owned, officially off-limits, and structurally unsound, though that hasn't stopped urban explorers and photographers from treating them as a pilgrimage site. What remains is a post-apocalyptic grid of hollow concrete shells, their identical forms creating an eerie visual rhythm as you walk the overgrown streets. Graffiti covers every surface. Trees grow through floors and roofs, their roots cracking foundations that were supposed to last forever. Vines strangle walls. The brutalist geometry, so confident in 1911, now looks like the skeleton of a neighborhood that had its soul surgically removed. Nature isn't just reclaiming Concrete City, it's slowly, methodically dismantling a failed promise, one freeze-thaw cycle at a time. Harmony. Harmony was built by people preparing for the end of the world, and that preparation left a residue. The Harmony Society, a German religious sect led by George Rapp, founded the town in 1804 as their first American settlement. They practiced absolute celibacy, communal ownership, and rigid discipline, believing Christ's return was imminent. They were also incredibly successful, producing high-quality goods that made them wealthy. But success wasn't the point. Purity was. In 1814, they sold everything and moved to Indiana, then later returned to Pennsylvania to build their final community at Economy. What they left behind still feels like theirs. The original Harmonist buildings remain, sturdy brick structures with an austere, almost severe simplicity that reflects the sect's rejection of worldly excess. But the most unsettling feature is the cemetery, a large field enclosed by a massive circular stone gate designed to roll open only once on Judgment Day. Inside, bodies were buried in unmarked uniform graves. No headstones, no names, no individuality, even in death. The gate weighs tons and has never been opened since the last burial. Stand in that field, and the silence feels engineered, not natural. This was a town that ran on collective submission to an apocalyptic vision where personal identity was systematically erased in service of spiritual perfection. The orderly streets and carefully preserved buildings don't radiate peace, they radiate control. Kinzua Viaduct. The Kinzua Viaduct was an iron monument to Gilded Age ambition. 301 feet high, 2,053 feet long, the tallest and longest railroad bridge in the world when completed in 1882. Trains crossed the gorge on 20 support towers that looked impossibly delicate for the weight they carried. For over a century, it stood as proof that human engineering could conquer any landscape. Then, on July 21, 2003, an F1 tornado ripped through the valley during a restoration project and tore 11 of the 20 towers from their foundations, like a child pulling apart a toy. What remains is divided into two halves, the living and the dead. The surviving section was converted into the Kinzua Skywalk, a pedestrian bridge extending 624 feet into empty air, before ending abruptly at a glass-floored observation platform. You walk out over the gorge, and the structure just stops. Below, visible through the trees on the valley floor 300 feet down, the other half lies in a massive twisted pile of oxidizing iron. Towers collapsed in on themselves, beams bent at impossible angles. The wreckage left exactly where it fell. The wind never stops up there. It howls through the remaining ironwork with a sound that's part whistle, part moan, the voice of a structure that's half monument and half corpse. You're standing on a bridge to nowhere, staring at the rusted skeleton of its other half, and the message is unnervingly clear. Nature always gets the final word. Wehrum. Wehrum didn't crumble. It was systematically dismantled. Founded in 1901 by the Lackawanna Iron and Coal Company as a model coal patch town complete with electricity and running water, it thrived for 3 decades before the mines closed in the 1930s. The company salvaged what it could. The last residents left in the 1950s. Unlike ghost towns where buildings decay into picturesque ruins, Wehrum was erased with industrial efficiency, leaving only foundations, the concrete company store vault, and a crumbling jail scattered through state game lands forest. The creepiness is archaeological. You hike through dense woods and stumble onto a stone foundation outline. Someone's home. 20 feet away, another, then another. The grid becomes visible only after you've walked it, and your brain piecing together the ghost of streets from the pattern of absent houses. The company store vault sits alone in a clearing, a massive concrete box that once held the town's economic heart, now just a container for nothing, surrounded by trees that weren't there when it mattered. Palmerton. Palmerton's scar is written on the landscape in dead earth. For 75 years, two zinc-smelting plants released heavy metals, zinc, lead, cadmium, into the air with zero filtration. The emissions didn't just poison the town's soil and water, they killed Blue Mountain itself, stripping 2,000 acres bare in a slow-motion environmental apocalypse that left a lunar wasteland towering over the valley. In 1983, the EPA declared it a Superfund site. Decades of cleanup and desperate revegetation followed. Today, the mountain is slowly, painfully, turning green again as transplanted vegetation struggles to take root in soil that spent 3/4 of a century being chemically sterilized. Yeah, but the scar remains visible for miles, a vast brown patch on the ridgeline that speaks to exactly how long it takes nature to recover from industrial abuse and how short a time it takes to destroy it completely. Hookstown. Hookstown itself is unremarkable, a small western Pennsylvania borough that would be entirely forgettable if not for the legend that haunts its back roads. But the Green Man wasn't a legend. He was Raymond Robinson, a real person whose childhood electrical accident in 1919 destroyed his face, took his eyes and nose, and cost him an arm. Shunned by a world that couldn't handle his appearance, he walked remote roads at night to avoid frightening people. For decades, locals and teenagers treated those walks like a monster hunt, driving the dark roads hoping to spot him, turning a disfigured man's attempt at normalcy into entertainment. Robinson died in 1985, but the roads still carry his story, not as ghost tale, but as something far more uncomfortable. As the legend of Charlie No-Face transformed genuine human suffering into folklore, proof that sometimes the cruelest monsters are the ones holding flashlights. Gettysburg. Gettysburg's creepiness isn't paranormal, it's mathematical. Over 51,000 casualties in 3 July days turned this town of 2,400 into an open-air morgue. Bodies were stacked in temporary graves across every field and yard before eventual reburial. The battlefield is now pristine, maintained, mapped, and sold. Ghost tours run nightly. Paranormal investigators treat it like Disneyland, but walk Devil's Den at dusk when the tours leave, and the wait becomes physical. This isn't haunted, it's saturated. Ground so soaked in concentrated death that the town built on top of it can never fully escape the math. Gettysburg's tragedy isn't that it forgot, it's that it can't, and turned that inability into an industry. Byrnesville. Byrnesville was Centralia's twin, just 2 miles away, another coal patch town sitting above the same burning seam. When the fire spread underground in the 1970s, residents faced identical dangers. Carbon monoxide seeping into basements, ground subsidence, invisible poison venting through cracks. But while Centralia's slow death became famous, photographed, and mythologized by holdouts who refused to leave, Byrnesville made a different choice. Using the same federal relocation funds, the government acquired every property. By 1996, all 75 homes had been demolished with brutal efficiency. Today, nothing remains. Not foundations, not ruins, not even a historical marker. Just Byrnesville Road cutting through empty grass where hundreds once lived, worked, raised children, buried neighbors. You can drive it in under a minute. The creepiness isn't decay, it's surgical erasure. A town deleted so completely it exists only in memory and old property records. Centralia kept its ghosts. Byrnesville didn't even keep the buildings for them to haunt. Ringing Rocks County Park. Ringing Rocks County Park contains 8 acres of diabase boulders that shouldn't make sound, but do. Strike them with a hammer and they ring with clear metallic tones, like bells forged from stone. Science offers theories about internal crystalline structure and residual formation stress, but no complete explanation. Not every rock rings. No one knows why some do and others don't. The field itself amplifies the strangeness. No trees grow within its boundaries. Wildlife avoids it. The silence before you strike a stone feels ancient and expectant, broken only by those impossible chimes echoing through woods that seem to be waiting for something. It's a purely natural phenomenon that feels deeply wrong, a geological glitch that was here before people and will be here after, ringing its unexplained song into empty air. Old Economy Village. Old Economy Village is where Utopia went to die of old age. The Harmony Society's third and final settlement, founded in 1824 after they sold their thriving Indiana community, became the wealthiest and most successful of their experiments, and their tomb. As a celibate sect, they could only grow through conversion. When converts stopped coming, the society simply aged out. By 1905, there weren't enough members left to continue, and the experiment ended not with persecution or disaster, but demographic math. What remains is unnervingly pristine. George Rapp's imposing great house, community dwellings, workshops, gardens maintained to period perfection. It's a National Historic Landmark where every building stands empty and immaculate, monuments to a belief system that deliberately chose extinction. Because the orderly streets radiate quiet melancholy, not the chaos of abandonment, but the eerie stillness of a place that completed its lifespan exactly as designed, then simply stopped breathing. 17 towns, 17 different ways for a place to break. Some burned from below, some were poisoned from above, some were dismantled by policy or simply deleted by time. But they all share the same quality. They're places where the wound never closed, where the past isn't history, it's infrastructure. These aren't tourist attractions, they're evidence. Evidence that sometimes the ground itself can turn against you, that entire communities can vanish so completely they become blank spots on the map, that the systems built to sustain life can just as easily suffocate it. Pennsylvania's hidden landscape isn't in guidebooks because it tells a story most road trips prefer to skip, that progress leaves scars, that abandonment has a physical weight, and that some silences are louder than any sound a place ever made when it was alive.